We can create a new composition. You can Control N, and I'll call this particle wipe. I'm just working in 640 by 480 right now, just to keep things moving on quickly. First, I'll create my type that will be my subject here. So I'm just going to create a simple linear wipe on this type here. And then we'll lay some particle elements on top of this to embellish this wipe. So I'll select Transition, Linear Wipe, and set a keyframe for the transition completion over the course of 1 second. So this wipes. Now it's going the wrong direction, so I'll just flip the wipe angle around and feather this a little bit. So as the type wipes on, we get a nice, smooth, feathered wipe like that. Now, the goal with particular is to sort of, like I said, embellish this as this type wipes on. So let's create a solid for our first particle wipe. And let's apply trapcode particular. Now, up here in our animation presets, there are a number of great presets that have been included by trapcode. And the first one we're going to access is called Wipe Glow Orange. And if I play this, we'll see that it looks like some glowy orange dots that wipe across the screen like that. Now we need to make a couple adjustments here. The timing isn't quite lining up with the wipe on our text, and I also think that the particles are a little bit too big. So this is what we're going to fix. First of all, let's change the location of the emitter. Let's take a look at our settings here. We're using a sphere emitter, so it's emitting in a spherical area around this point here, in an area that's defined right here. 50 by 99 in the Y by 50 in the Z. The location is defined right here, this position X, Y, and this is keyframed. So I'm going to hit the U key to show the keyframes on this layer, and we can see that our position X, Y have 2 keyframes here. And it's moving just a little bit too fast. So I'm going to slow this down by moving the second keyframe further out. So it's going to take more time to wipe across the screen. Now it's lining up a little bit better with our wipe. And like I said, the particle size is a little bit too large. So the particle size is defined in the particle section. So let's go into the particle section here and go to the size and turn this down to about 5. I think that should be good. There, so we've modified our first preset. Let's pull up another preset. Go into Layer, New Solid. This will be the organic lines. And we'll access particular by going into the effect window and selecting the last effect used, which is particular. Let's go into the effect presets here and select Organic Lines Motion. This is a fantastic preset included for free with this plugin. Now the problem with this is that because it does look so cool, this is a very commonly used preset, and I've seen this all over the place. So it helps to know how to modify this a little bit to make it not look like the preset that comes right out of the pop-up menu here. First thing we can do is go into the options and modify the randomness of these settings here. Now what I mean by that is, if we go into the options here, we have a setting here called Random Seed. What this does is more or less defines the starting point for all of the random values inside particular. So every random value that is chosen starts with this random seed value right here, which is now 0. If I set this to 1, everything inside this plugin on this layer is going to take on a completely different set of random values. This is one way to make this preset not look like a preset. Another thing we can do is change the color of these particles. So I can go into the particle section here, and as we learned before, we have a number of controls over the color of the particles, like the color over life, which right now we see is this light orange to darker orange. Let's change this to a yellow, and we'll change this to red. just changing up the colors just a little bit. And I also would like to size the particles down a little bit so these lines aren't quite so thick. Now, you would think I'd be able to go into the particle section here and size down the particles, but you see right now, these are set to 0. Now, we're going to cover this in a lot more detail later on in the aux system, but for now, we're just going to touch on this very lightly. If we go into the aux system here, this aux system section here, the aux system is a separate section where we can emit additional particles. And what's going on here, if I go into this particle section and I turn the size up here, we can see that we have particles over here that have a size of 0. They're more or less invisible. Now what's going on is that these particles are emitting particles as they move across the screen. And that's what the aux system is. It emits particles from other particles. So if I go to the aux system here, we have a similar set of controls like size, size over life, opacity, etc. So if I turn the size down here, we're going to see the size of the particles that are trailing become a little bit thinner, a little bit smaller. Now, like I said, we're going to cover the aux system in great detail later on, but with this preset being so commonly used, it really helps to know right off the bat how to modify this one and get into the aux system and change the settings here. Now let's layer one more setting on here, and this one we're going to create from scratch. So we'll add some additional star particles that wipe along with this wipe. So go into Layer New Solid, and we'll make these stars. Bullet Particular. And let's solo the stars and the type. We're making this setting from scratch. So first, I'm going to go into the particle section here and select the star particle type. Now I need to have this move along the screen and wipe with the type. So I need to change the emitter position. The emitter position needs to animate over time. So let's put it in its starting point first, like right over here. And then at this point in time, right there, the emitter needs to move over and end up right there. So let's set a keyframe and hit U to show our keyframes. So right there, we're going to create a keyframe. And right there, we'll move the position of the XY emitter right over there. So now it's sort of wiping right along with the text. Now, what's happening is that when it gets to the end and stops, the emitter stays at this point and continues to emit particles. So what we need to do is shut off the emitter at that point. We don't want it emitting particles anymore. So up here in the emitter section, I can keyframe the particles per second to stop it emitting particles once it hits that keyframe point right there. So I'll set keyframe for the particles per second. Let's hit U again to show our keyframes and quickly animate this from 100 down to 0. So once it hits this point, it will no longer emit particles. Now, one thing I'm seeing that I don't like about this setting right now is that all of these stars are completely identical. They don't have any individual rotation or individual size or individual opacity. Now, as we covered in that overview section, we have a large amount of control over the randomness of all of these settings. And this is really what adds to the aesthetic of our particle settings, is adding different types of randomness to make this feel a lot more organic. So let's jump into the particle section here. Let's add a little bit of randomness to the size. And let's add some rotation speed. Again, this can be very low because it's full revolutions per second. Let's add a little bit of randomness in the opacity. And let's change the color. We'll just set this to be at birth, and we'll set this to a yellow. There. Now if we unsolo these two layers, you can see how all these mix together. So we've got our stars that we created from scratch. We've got the white, glow orange, and the organic lines, all kind of adding on top of this little type wipe that we did to turn an ordinary type wipe into something a little more interesting.